I'd been doing a little more thinking since the last video because I was feeling unfulfilled. Like I felt I didn't really get to the root of the issue, at least as much as I wanted when I started. Not that I didn't learn anything from it, or that my conclusions don't really matter anymore. You know, they were definitely the stepping stones I needed to be able to understand what I still need to figure out. A kind of surface level understanding that I needed to break through to get to the meat of the issue. I just didn't feel like I walked away with as great an insight as I thought I would have, and I think I just need a little more clarity. So I asked myself some questions to get a better understanding of how I even got here in the first place. Why am I so deeply entrenched in owning and collecting physical media? Why wasn't I able to develop a deeper relationship with digital in the first place? And how much of this is actually just nostalgia? And I think I need to go all the way to the beginning to see the entire picture. You see, I grew up in the late 90s and early 2000s, so all of my formative years were kind of spent around the period when technology as we know it was just on the rise. Back then I felt like it was more on the periphery of life in general, as opposed to now where we can't really escape it no matter how much we try. As a teenager, I didn't even have a phone. I barely had access to the internet. And I think it's this limited access that ended up shaping how I would interact with video games as I grew up. Since technology was still growing, pretty much all the games that I could get were physical and were only played on consoles. And I will always remember my first real taste of gaming. It was the beginning of the 2000s, and one time my family went to visit my aunt who lived hours and hours away. I don't remember the exact reason we were visiting, but we were staying for a few days, so it would have been a holiday, probably Christmas. And my aunt basically forced my cousins to give me and my little brother a Game Boy Color, because I think they had another one or they already had the Game Boy Advance. Either way, it was the transparent purple kind, and it was the most beautiful thing I had seen in my life up to that point. So they gave it to us with a game. Pretty sure it was a Pokémon game. It might have been Yellow. And I remember falling in love at first sight. As soon as I touched it, nothing was getting that Game Boy out of my hands. It was like I felt a shift in the world, and from then on, the collection pretty much began. The next significant event, probably the most significant, was when I saw a commercial for Pokémon Ruby and Sapphire one day. And I don't know why, but it triggered a really strong emotion for me. So much so that I literally begged my dad that same day if we could get a Game Boy Advance so I can play that new Pokémon game. I don't think I'd ever had a reaction like that to other games before, but there was something special about that commercial that really got to me in like a manic level. And to my surprise, my dad said yes, and the next thing I knew, we were driving in the middle of the night to our local Best Buy, just the two of us. I remember I made a beeline straight to the gaming section, and I picked out an Indigo Game Boy Advance and a copy of Pokémon Sapphire, mostly because I thought the cover legendary looked so much cooler. And right as we were checking out, the employee at the register, bless his heart, saw the Game Boy and told us, hey, you know, if you wait until next week, the new Game Boy SP is coming out and it's gonna have an internal battery, a backlit screen, and it folds and looks really cool. But I was basically a horse with blinders at that point. First of all, I didn't even know what this new SP thing was, and I didn't really care about anything else, so I was like, but I want to play the game now. And my dad was like, are you sure you don't want to wait just one more week? But nothing was convincing me at that point. I needed to play that game like right now. So my dad bought it and we went home, and I remember this so vividly because I have regretted this decision for over 20 years now. The entire time I had the base model, I was pretty much just gaslighting myself trying to play at night and thinking, oh man, this is awesome, when in reality I fully couldn't see anything on the screen. But this moment is so burned in my memory because I still remember the feeling of walking out of that store, getting in the car, and reading the back of the box with the slivers of light from street lamps as we drove by. And I remember basically bursting out of my skin with excitement about the journey that I was about to experience. I think it really was a big part of why I place so much value in having a physical copy. And then the collection grew more with every new console, but I had never bought a game from a digital store until much later in life. Which begs the question, why did it take me such a long time? Why couldn't I develop a relationship with digital as easy as I did with physical? I was going back and forth on this one to see if I could pinpoint a specific event, and I think I might have an idea, even if it doesn't fit 100% of the way. I mentioned earlier that I barely had access to the internet when I was younger. This was because my dad limited our screen time on the family PC to maybe 2 hours a day, and there was a pretty robust child lock too, so our slice of the internet was very small. But looking back on it now, I think that was also a good thing, because that meant the digital world was safely contained in that one section of the room. I really had to make an effort to go there, almost like going to an actual place. Especially because it took like 30 minutes for the PC to turn on, and loading a single website took another 5, so I really had to be intentional with the time I had to spend. If I wasn't careful, my 2 hours would be up before I even got the chance to start having any fun. And then one day in middle school, during I think English class, my best friend at the time handed me a bunch of papers during a lecture. And we would always pass notes and even notebooks back and forth when a little piece of paper couldn't fit all of our ideas anymore, so it wasn't really anything out of the ordinary. But this time it was different. They were printouts of starting classes in what looked to be a video game, drawn in this cute chibi kind of style. And he told me all about this online game called MapleStory and how I should try it out. I had never played an online game before at this point, only random flash games, but the characters were intriguing enough, so I went home that day and tried to download it. Now, I wasn't as tech savvy back then, so it might have been 100% a me issue, but something kept going wrong with the download and I spent so much time trying to get it to work. After a while, I just gave up and asked my dad if he could download the game for me, and when I woke up the next day, the icon was right there in the middle of the desktop, like a door waiting for me to open it. I was so excited, especially so I could tell my best friend all about it, but when I tried to launch it, it still didn't work. No matter what I did, it did not want to start. At that point, I had exhausted all of my resources and kind of just accepted the fact that I would never be able to play this game, which was a bummer because my best friend was excited enough about it that he would try to connect with me in that way, so I felt a bit of disappointment for him too. But I think that was a pivotal moment that would influence my relationship with online/digital games from that point on. That experience told me that online games were unreliable. Unreliable in the sense that it's not a guarantee that it'll work, because you have to take a lot more things into account. User error, download speeds, memory, hardware even, as opposed to physical games where if I take a disc or cartridge and put it into the console, I'll be able to play that game without having to worry about anything else. It was reliable enough that I knew it would do exactly what it's supposed to do. And so I never entertained online games from that point on, which I'm certain bled into what would become a sort of bias against digital as I got older. I have since purchased games from a digital storefront as an adult, but I can pretty much count them on 2 hands. The first I can remember was Yu-Gi-Oh! World Duel Carnival on the 3DS, which was very disappointing, and honestly a waste of money since everything was already unlocked from the start. Then years later, I bought some Switch games that were miraculously on sale, some of which I still haven't played actually, and I only bought them because they were between like $5 and $10. But it wasn't until the beginning of 2020, around when quarantine happened, that I started forming a deeper relationship with digital games. Since I couldn't leave the house, I was at the mercy of online stores if I wanted to play a new game or a game that I didn't have already. And I remember it was the evening of my birthday that year when I decided to buy Animal Crossing New Horizons on the eShop. I think it was at that point during quarantine where it had finally started to sink in that things were really bad. Like, bad. Like, there was a genuine fear and possibility that if I took a step outside, I wouldn't be able to come back in. Then during my own internal spiraling, trying to navigate this new reality, there was a tiny sliver of hope on the internet called New Horizons. I had never played an Animal Crossing game before and never really expressed any interest, but I felt drawn to this one somehow. And so I bought it and played it that night for the first time, and before I knew it, everything just kind of faded away. What felt like just a few minutes on the couch were actually hours of, well, I guess you would call them chores, like gathering wood, catching bugs and fish, and getting scammed by Tom Nook whenever you talk to him, and spending time with the villagers who started this journey with me. It sounds really cringy when I say it out loud, but at the time, it really felt like they were right there next to me. And that game defined 2020. I played it every single day and really got into it actually, as in pretty much obsessed with it. I was on Nookazon trading items every day. I spent every Sunday morning having coffee and refreshing turnip.exchange for good turnip prices. I had also grown a friend group where we would visit each other's islands if there were new recipes or meteor showers or if Red was visiting one of us. We would decorate for each holiday event and just hung out on Discord because we all just really needed a sense of community then, however we could get it. But even with such a significant experience with a digital game that I didn't even know was possible, especially after all these years, I still didn't feel like I owned digital games. I still felt like I was only borrowing it. I was still stuck in that mindset of needing to have physical media to claim ownership. Like if I can't touch it, I don't actually own it. And I think this all came to a head at the beginning of this year. At the end of 2025, I made a conscious effort to use PS Plus more, and in February of this year, while browsing the library, I came across a trailer for this side-scrolling puzzle game called Far Changing Tides. I responded really well to the atmosphere and the simplicity of the art style and decided from there that it was something I genuinely wanted to play. But the first order of business was to see if it was available in physical. Unfortunately, it wasn't. It was only available digitally. This was a conundrum that quickly devolved into a crisis where I didn't know if I even wanted to play it because there were no physical copies available. But on the other hand, I wanted to play it because the gameplay looked really fun and I love the art style and the kind of laid-back atmosphere. And I found myself going around in circles. I was stuck in this loop of, well, there's no other way of playing it other than digitally, so I just have to accept it. But if I play it and end up really liking it to the point where I'd want to keep replaying it in the future, I could potentially lose access to it because I wouldn't have a physical copy to fall back on. And it went on and on until I reached a breaking point, and I realized something that was quite obvious when looking from the outside. I was so preoccupied with trying to solve these future scenarios in my head that may or may not even happen, instead of just playing and enjoying the game. This was crazy to me. I was fully ready to deprive myself of a new experience because of my obsession with kind of preserving games as I knew it. And then I realized that what I was doing, and have been doing since I became an adult, was prioritizing the object and not the experience. I was more worried about preservation than experiencing the game itself. And it got me thinking because back then when I was a kid, I wasn't preoccupied with wondering if I'm going to be able to play a game in the next 20 years. I just played the game when I got it and enjoyed it at that moment, and I was happy. And I think that's the biggest thing I learned from this whole kind of soul-searching. I'm learning that the memory is not necessarily tied to the physical item, at least not completely. I think it's more attached to the experience of actually playing the game. Like, my brother and I didn't bond and develop our love for video games over the physical disc itself. We bonded over what was in the disc and the experience and memories it gave us. So what am I doing moving forward? First of all, I will 100% still continue to get physical copies of games until I literally can't anymore. But my brother also convinced me to buy a pre-built PC that was future-proofed enough to play games for the next 10 years or so. And for as long as I can, I'm going to continue playing big AAA games physically on a console, because that's how I like to experience those kinds of games, especially if they're narrative-focused like The Last of Us or Ghost of Tsushima. But I'm also going to give indie games a chance because I never really did growing up. And so I'm using Steam for the first time to play games that I'm not able to get physically. I actually just participated in my first Steam Next Fest, and even though I only caught the tail end of it, it was an amazing experience, and it made me really excited about games that I would never have even known existed otherwise. In particular, I have wishlisted 3 games from all the demos that I played. First is Luna Abyss, which is kind of like Returnal but first person, with fun bullet hell mechanics and a really challenging boss fight at the end of the demo. Next is Armatus, which is a third-person roguelite shooter where you fight demons in a post-apocalyptic Paris. And finally is Solateria, which is a hand-drawn Metroidvania that is very reminiscent of Hollow Knight in terms of look and atmosphere, but with an emphasis on parrying, which was really fun to play. And I'm kind of hoping, I know this whole video is like me trying to embrace digital gaming more, but I kind of do want these games physically if I can, but baby steps. And so I think the hardest part in all of this was changing my mindset and learning to let go, even just a little bit. I am very stubborn, have been all my life, and at this point probably always will be, but I know when to back off when I need to. At least I like to tell myself that I do. And letting go is something I'm constantly working on. But I think this was a good exercise for me because it made me accept, probably for the first time, the fact that some things are not meant to last forever. There are many things in my life that are not there anymore. Pets who have since passed. Friends I've completely lost touch with over the years. And I think I was under the impression that physical media are like time capsules, in a way. Some kind of portal to a place that's frozen in time that will continue to be there forever. A place that I can visit whenever I want as long as I have that item. But the more I think about it, the more I believe that maybe the promise of forever isn't what really matters in the end. I mean, that's kind of the whole point of our existence, right? Like, we're here to make the most of whatever time we have in this world. In the end, I think memories stick with us because they happen when we're not really thinking about anything but just experiencing those moments for what they were. I think nostalgia just means we made memories that were worth remembering. And maybe it's the impermanence of something that gives it meaning, after all.